Okay, welcome everyone. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. I am Gail Koza, and I am a member of the Board of Directors of the American Cetacean Society San Francisco Bay Chapter. We are delighted to have you here this evening. I have with me David McGuire, who will be our featured speaker this evening. Before I get into further introductions of David, I just want to tell you a little bit about the American Cetacean Society in case there's anyone joining who is not familiar with us. We are the oldest whale conservation nonprofit on the planet. We were actually founded in 1967, and our mission is to protect and conserve whales, dolphins, and porpoises and their habitats. And we do this through public education, research grants, and conservation actions. The San Francisco Bay Chapter of the American Cetacean Society is a completely volunteer nonprofit. We offer educational programs and outreach and research grants to marine biologists and advanced degree students to support important cetacean research. As part of our educational programs, we offer this monthly speaker series where we feature scientists, conservationists, photographers, filmmakers, and other ocean experts who can share their knowledge about cetaceans, their habitats, and other species that play important roles in healthy marine and riverine ecosystems. We are funded by individual donations, and we're grateful for your support. If you'd like to make a donation, please visit our website at acs-sfbay.org and click on the donate button. Thank you for your support. Now, I am delighted to tell you more about David McGuire, our speaker this evening. David is a marine biologist and a shark advocate. He's the founder of ocean health and shark conservation nonprofit Shark Stewards, which is dedicated to saving sharks and protecting critical marine habitat. As a sailing captor, dive master, and filmmaker, David has explored the world's oceans on numerous sailing voyages, producing media with an emphasis on sharks and ocean awareness. His undergraduate work in marine biology at UC Santa Barbara led him to study whales in Mexico and join an expedition across the Pacific. He has a master's degree in environmental health from UC Berkeley, where he worked for over a decade in the Department of Integrated Biology. A research associate of the Department of Aquatic Biology at the California Academy of Sciences, David is conducting a shark research program that includes shark population studies, movements, and fisheries impacts. An adjunct professor at the University of San Francisco, David also teaches marine protection policy and marine ecology. I could go on. David's qualifications are numerous and most impressive. And I would encourage you to visit the Shark Stewards website to learn much more about him and his organization. But I don't want to take up any more time now. I'd like to really hand off to David to allow him to share his wealth of knowledge about sharks with us this evening. So David, take it away.
Thank you, Gail, and thank you, American Cetacean Society. I can't see you, but I'm sure I know many of you here at the Northern California chapter, which I've had the opportunity to visit from time to time and also cross over paths in many other ways, including Susan and Izzy at the Dolphin Club, as well as the International Ocean Film Festival. So I guess Susan and Izzy are off camping, but I appreciate the invitation. I'm going to share my screen, and I want to wish you all a happy Sharktober, and I'm going to explain what that means if you don't know it or haven't already heard the term Sharktober. That was kind of a funny bio. It was a little bit, I don't know where you got that. I mean, it's current, it's true, but it was great that you got that. I have had an association with whales and researching whales and the American Cetacean Society. So I appreciate the opportunity to give back because the ACS has given to me a long time ago. When I was an undergraduate at UC Santa Barbara, I studied gray whales in Mexico looking at feeding behavior and actually diving, and we were tying in energetics. And it was an American Cetacean Society sponsored project with UC Irvine. So I want to talk today about local sharks, shark diversity, what we call Sharktober, and why I've committed my life to protecting sharks and protecting ocean health. So I founded Shark Stewards in 2006. We're part of the Earth Island Institute in Berkeley, right across from campus where I did my graduate work and worked, as Gail said. We work in applying education and science towards advocacy and policy change, not only in fishing, but also in other impacts on the oceans and ocean health. And that includes our air breathing marine mammals and our cousins in the ocean. I am a research associate, luckily enough, with the California Academy of Sciences, where I've been able to study sharks and go on expeditions, work with the scientists. I'm a National Geographic explorer, where I kind of learned my chops on expeditions to actually documenting coral reef health as well as shark finning. And that's what catalyzed me to quit my job at UC Berkeley and found Shark Stewards to address this incredible degradation that's happening in the past decades in my lifetime on ocean populations of marine megafauna, but also invertebrates and other marine organisms. I'm an expeditioneer. I've crossed many oceans. And along the way, I've documented and written and tried to raise awareness about what's going on in our oceans, not only in a bad sense, because a lot of bad is going on, but also the wonder and the beauty of marine life and the ocean, and just how incredible this massive organ, the ocean, is to humans and the life that lives there. I've been involved with the International Ocean Film Festival in San Francisco for 16 years. On the screening committee, as a volunteer, as an educator, in many ways, as a filmmaker as well, including submitting my first film, Shark Stewards of the Reef, that was made on an expedition through the South Pacific, where I experienced shark finning. We documented it and realized how serious it was, and used the film to advocate for the California shark fin ban, among others, and also the protection of the northwestern Hawaiian Islands, the Papahanaumokuakea, which at the time was the largest marine protected area in the world, replete with humpback whales, the most endangered pinniped, the monk seal, many species of sharks, and the healthiest and largest reef system in US waters, and now enjoying its 15th year of marine protection. I was just in Kona to celebrate that, as well as work on a new tiger shark study, since we aren't able to go to Asia, where we advocate for shark protection and marine protected areas for the past 8 or 9 years. So going back to, a long time ago, when my hair was about this long and way blonder, I guess gray is the new blonde, and I studied gray whales in the lagoons of Baja. And at the time, people did not believe the paradigm was that gray whales did this incredible migration between the lagoons off of Baja, California, and the Sea of Cortez, went along the coastal margins, past the San Francisco shoreline, all the way up to the Chukchi Sea, off of Alaska, in the Bering Sea, where they feed, and they get fat, and then they come back down in the winter months where it's warm, and the females would gestate and give birth in these lagoons. And the paradigm was that these whales didn't feed. Well, that seemed pretty stupid to most of us. It's like, why would a big animal that needs these calories and all this energetics, one of the longest continuous annual migrations each year, 13,000 miles or so round trip, why would they not feed? So we were diving in the lagoons. There were a lot fewer rules then, and observed them feeding. And eventually there were a couple of publications. And of course, gray whales are opportunistic feeders. They do feed along the bottom, but they also feed in aggregations, feed on aggregations of krill or larvae near the surface, in kelp beds, or wherever they can, to try to maintain that blubber layer that keeps them warm and keeps them moving. So that was a program that was sponsored by the American Cetacean Society. in Southern California and UC Irvine. And I was an undergraduate at UC Santa Barbara, working with my friend Dennis Kelly at the Orange Coast College, which is a junior college. And we went on field trips for 2 winter quarters. And it was just an incredible life-shaping experience that changed my life. And my direction was already to become a marine biologist. And I stopped studying whales, but I never will forget that experience. But let's talk about sharks. Although we did see sharks and evidence of feeding on whales in the lagoons of Baja by white sharks, typically they are on dead babies. We didn't see a lot of sharks when we were there. But here in what we call the Red Triangle, we do see a lot of white sharks in particular during the period of what we call Sharktober, which we are coming right into the peak. And I'll talk a little bit more about why we phrase that. Surfers call it Sharktober, and why we created Sharktober Fest to celebrate sharks and the return, not only the white sharks, but the recovery of the population of this apex predator, as well as recovery of the gray whales and other marine mammals since the Marine Mammal Protection Act was implemented in 1972. So I want to just talk about celebrating sharks, because that's what Sharktober Fest is. Not only about the star of the show, Carcharodon carcharias, the white shark that we often hear about, and sometimes we hear about in a negative fashion when there's a little bump or occasionally a bite, but also because of the fear factor and the way the news media pounces on it and has their own feeding frenzy, because if it bleeds, it leads. And quite often people have a negative impression, particularly of white sharks, thanks to films like Jaws and then the spinoff of Shark Week. But really, sharks are incredibly diverse. They're highly specialized to different ecological niches, different feeding patterns. They migrate. Some stay still, some live in estuaries, some live in the deepest sea. They've occupied just about every ecological niche in the oceans because they've been around for 400 million years, long before we came about and went into the ocean and came back out of the ocean, and our cousins stayed or went back in, actually, the whales and dolphins and pinnipeds. But we are fortunate enough off the Northeast Pacific in these abundant temperate waters to have a high diversity of sharks, or elasmobranchs. And elasmobranchs is a suborder of chondrichthyid or cartilaginous fish that we know as sharks, rays, and chimera. So we know what sharks are. That's this beautiful fusiform, torpedo-shaped, powerful swimmers, big lunate tail like the salmon shark that looks very much like a white shark, but it's not. Large fins, highly maneuverable, big muscles, usually specialized teeth and feeding mechanisms. And even these laminid sharks have highly specialized body forms, but this is a familiar shape, quite often mistaken for juvenile sharks or great white sharks. We had a call at the Dolphin Club. It was a phone call. I wasn't there, and it was a news media outlet, and they said, there's a great white shark in Aquatic Park. I had to laugh because I'm a Dolphin Club swimmer and I swim in the bay, and I know a fair bit about white shark populations and their behavior. And I asked how big it was, and they said, well, it's 6 feet. And I said, if it's 6 feet, it can't be a white shark, because that's the size typically of a young of year great white shark. And until very recently, with the recovery of this population and increase in sea surface temperatures, we don't see small sharks off our coastline. We just see the big ones. And there's no way a self-respecting big white shark would find itself in that shallow confines of Aquatic Park in 6 to 12 feet of water. So this was a salmon shark that migrates up our coastline every summer to feed on salmon, highly specialized piscivores that eat salmon primarily, but other bony fish. Basking sharks, which are a filter feeder, the second biggest fish in the sea, because sharks are fish, but they are cartilaginous fish. They're not the osteichthyes. They are the cartilaginous or chondrichthyes fish. These sharks come up off of our coastline. They can get up to 35, 40 feet, almost as many tons. They filter feed larvae and plankton, take giant gulps of hundreds of gallons of water, and filter it past specialized gill rakers and retain their prey as the water is exhausted, much like a baleen whale or a mysticete, like a humpback or a blue whale would do with their specialized filtration mechanism, which is not their gills. It's actually modified tooth structure. And then we have these magnificent sharks that migrate past our coastline. Sometimes they come into the San Francisco Bay and actually use the San Francisco Bay as a nursery or potentially even a breeding spot, probably not for threshers, but definitely for many other species of elasmobranch prey. They're highly acrobatic. This caudal fin, this upper appendage of their tail, can be 1/3 of their body length, very powerful, very maneuverable, really beautiful sharks, of which we have 3 species off of the west coast of North America. And I think that's really amazing because these sharks are increasingly rare globally for food, and which they are still hunted commercially off Southern California, but also for sport, including here in the San Francisco Bay, but also highly coveted for their fins for shark fin soup, which is an Asian delicacy that's driven a huge demand for shark population, for sharks globally, and caused a concomitant crash in many populations all around the world, driving at least 1/3 of the species towards the brink of extinction. The broad-nosed 7-gill shark is our big resident shark, but we found through our tagging studies with the California Academy of Sciences and Monterey Bay Aquarium that these big sharks come in, they get up to 9-10 feet, 350, 400 pounds. Again, the females are used in these warm, shallow waters to gestate. They're pregnant. These are actually highly fecund sharks. They can have as many as 60 or 80 babies. These sharks are targeted for world records here in the San Francisco Bay. And the sharks that they catch are pregnant. So these sports fishermen or these big game hunters are killing not just one shark, but maybe as many as 81 sharks. These are the apex predator in the San Francisco Bay, typically a deeper water shark that can go down off the continental shelf, about 30 miles offshore, down to 1,500 or even 2,000 feet. They inhabit areas like the Cordell Bank National Marine Sanctuary to our north. And we found that they migrate, the females will migrate south, the males will migrate north as far as British Columbia, but we don't yet know exactly when the females return. We do know that the San Francisco Bay is a very important habitat for reproduction and pupping for this beautiful shark. Its cousin in the Hexanchidae, the family Hexanchidae, which means 6 gills. This is a 6-gill shark. And so that's a cousin to the 7-gill, has a large eye. It's typically a deeper water shark, thousands of feet deep. These come into the San Francisco Bay and then come up the canyon that is around 300 to 200 feet deep. And they're probably feeding on other species of sharks. We don't exactly know what they're doing reproductively. They're not well studied locally, but we also do know that these are being entrained as bycatch primarily in fisheries, but also have been historically caught for their livers because sharks retain most of their energy in their liver in the form of fat, which has also been targeted for vitamin A, particularly during World War II when the cod fisheries were shut down because of the Nazi U-boats off the East Coast where they caught the cod liver, the cods for cod liver oil. So our shark populations, the 6-gill, 7-gills, and the unfortunately named soup fin shark were almost fished out commercially in the matter of less than 5 to 6 years. We think they have recovered, perhaps not completely, but since they aren't targeted as a food fish, they seem to be doing better than many species. And so here are 2 examples of our local hound shark. I think the leopard shark is a gorgeous shark. They get up to about 6 feet. They live in the bay, but they also live in kelp beds and along our margins. They eat invertebrates and bony fishes. They often frequent the bottom, but also the water column. Their larger cousin, the soup fin shark, beautiful shark that somewhat resembles a blue shark, very svelte, very shy, and they should be because they were targeted for their fins, and they were named soup fin shark from our new Chinese immigrants, perhaps reluctant immigrants, I should say, workers that were brought from China during the gold rush to serve as laborers. And they formed fishing villages like China Camp in Marin County. And they would also caught bay shrimp, but as well as occasionally these sharks, which they called soup fin because they were highly prized for this delicacy of the emperor's shark fin soup. And then the other two species of local smoothhounds, the brown and greyhound smoothhound, which are also in the hound shark family, that's Mustulus, is the genus. And they look very similar to a leopard shark, except they don't have those splendid barred patterns. And there are other ground sharks that live at the margins of the rocky points on Land's End or outside coastal, the Channel Islands to the south, rocky habitat like Point Lobos, the swell shark, and they're called swell sharks because they sculpt water. They'll swell up. Sometimes they'll grab their tail and wedge themselves under a rock to deter predation by sea lions, by elephant seals, or by other sharks. They also grunt when they exhaust. So they're one of the few sharks that actually make noise. Most sharks do not vocalize. They are very silent, except for the clacking of their teeth, perhaps. These are egg-laying sharks. Here's an egg case that sometimes you'll see washed up on the beach. It's made of keratin, which is the same material as our fingernails. It's tough. It protects the embryo. There's one embryo inside. You can see the yolk. It survives off that yolk until it's able to chew its way out with a specialized tooth and swim off fully formed and ready to forage. Sharks have a highly diverse reproductive strategy, from placental live bearing like mammals, aplacental live bearing, ovoviviparity where they have eggs internally that hatch live, and then oviparity or egg laying like the swell shark, and also like the Pacific horn shark, which is named for this little spine in front of his dorsal fins. These are in the heterodontidae, which means similar teeth. Asimilar teeth. So they have these asimilar jaws. They have a crushing plate-like on the bottom and more tooth-like on the top, where they can either catch fish, they can eat invertebrates and crush them like crabs or even clams. They're a very gentle shark. You can almost see them walking on the bottom. They're lobe fin. These are temperate species, but there are about, 13 species globally. They all more or less look the same morphologically. And they lay these spiral-shaped egg cases that auger themselves into the benthic habitat, the sand or the mud, until that juvenile or that embryo emerges as a young shark. Deeper water sharks come into our bay also, but also live off of the National Marine Sanctuary and off the escarpment, which is the continental shelf, and down to the benthos, the deeper sea. They're an abundant schooling shark, the spiny dogfish, the fisherman's bane because they get snagged in nets, except for if the fishermen are fishing for them, which many commercial fisheries do. These are commonly eaten, especially on the East Coast and Western Europe, as fish and chips. So these are a small shark, and they're called flake or whitefish or other euphemisms, but they're quite common as fish and chips. When I was in Santa Barbara, fish and chips were great white shark, which were caught legally. We'd see them landed, and they'd be sold quite commonly as fish steaks or white steaks, or as fish and chips. They give live birth. Again, they're fairly fecund. They have one of the longest gestation periods, as much as 3 years. They're pregnant and then give live birth. And so here's an embryo with its yolk sac. So this is an example of ovoviviparity, meaning the shark lays eggs internally, has two uteri on either side. It's kind of jam-packed with different developmental cycles of their young. Sometimes the young who are more developed will engage something called oophagy. They'll eat their womb mate's eggs for increased energy's sake, and so that they can be born with a greater advantage for survival. This is kind of a blending, if you will, a morphological similarity between the rays, kind of a transitional body shape, the angel sharks, but they have separate pectoral fins that almost look like they're fused to their head. They're dorsoventrally flattened like the rays are, but they are a shark, and they are highly camouflaged. They'll live in the sand, in the mud, and they will ambush. They'll catch their prey through ambush predation. They'll spring off their tail with lightning quick motion and snap their prey up. Or they'll also forage actively at night, and they'll forage with these barbels in the benthos and the sediments where they can feel their prey. These beautiful sharks were actually fished commercially. Again, when I was an undergraduate in the 80s, there was a fishery off of Bodega Bay, which is now closed. These sharks, again, because of that late onset of reproduction and relatively few young, long gestation periods, have not recovered, and this fishery is closed. This was once a highly abundant shark that was almost fished off of our coastline, but it's now being protected by Fish and Wildlife so that it can recover. And then there are the rays. This actually looks even more like a transitional body shape between the angel shark, which is flattened but still has detached pectoral fins, to the torpedo or the spiny guitar fish, or the torpedo rays, not the torpedo rays, the thornback guitar fish that have these semi-fused pectoral fins to their head. They have a body shape that looks kind of like a Fender guitar. So it's, they swim around in B flat. And they have two dorsal fins that will protrude above the sediment. They're active, again, not nocturnally, but they can burrow under and camouflage themselves. And their mouths are ventrally or to the bottom. Again, they eat invertebrates or dead fish, dying animals, crabs, and clams. The thornback guitarfish looks a little even more like a ray. It's rounder. Its pectoral fins are almost entirely fused, as you can see here. And it has this thorny back, but it has a similar natural history as its cousin. These all live in the San Francisco Bay and the estuaries along our coastline, and also off the nearshore continental shelf. The bat ray, which is our local example of a manta ray, this is a mobulid ray, and they're all in the family Mobulidae. So these are cousins to the giant rays that swim in the water column that can get to 18 feet, 22 feet, over a ton. These guys don't quite get as big. They can get to a few hundred pounds. Fishermen call them mud marlin because they fight. Some people eat them. Some people cut wings, holes in the wings, which are muscles, and call them scallopini. I forget what it's called. It's some kind of euphemism. But in most cases, they're let go, and they forage along the bottom also. They flap along the bottom, bioturbating, oxygenating, and revealing their prey, which can be fatty innkeeper worms, it can be clams, it can be crabs, Dungeness crab, young Dungeness crab, and they have crushing teeth. And these are very common all the way up into the shallow waters, in the estuaries, but also in the sediments in our coastal ecosystems. And the round stingray also, which are the true rays, they truly have a fused, what would have been a formal pectoral fin in this long tail. And these rays do have a stinger, as does the bat ray. In this case, the round stingray, it's venomous. The torpedo ray also has a spine, but it employs a different strategy. It's electric. It has an electric current that it can generate, and it'll create a current field between its fins and shock or stun its prey and then consume them. And occasionally a person who happens to touch them, because not these rays, but other rays can get hundreds of volts. Our local rays are more in the lower, maybe 100, 120 volts. But if you put your finger in a socket, you know what that feels like. So that actually can shock people and even cause cardiac arrest in people who might be at risk. They're very shy though, and they tend to move away from humans if they see them in the water. And they don't shock you if you step on them, like a stingray would sting you. The skates are a different group in the elasmobranch family. They're a unique outgrouping from the stingrays and the rays. They're the largest flat shark, which we call them, because they are cartilaginous. They are related to sharks. They have the largest egg case, and they're unique because they can have as many as 6 embryos inside its big egg case. So it's the largest egg case of the skates and rays along our coastline. And so you know right away where that came from. Raja binoculata meaning 2 spots, and Raja is ray. And these can get up quite large, and they live off the depths of the continental shelf, but they also come into the San Francisco Bay, we think, to gestate and possibly just to forage, but their egg cases are generally laid off of the continental slope beyond the Farallon Islands. So let's talk about the star of the show, Sharktober, because of course, we all know we have white sharks off of our coastline. If you hear the news, if you listen to the radio, and sometimes if you surf, swim, or dive, you might, I think, be lucky enough to see one, Carcharodon carcharias, the great white shark, or as we call them, white sharks, because as Dr. McCosker says, great is superlative. They are truly great. They're the largest toothy shark, smaller than the gray whale, but they can get up to as much as 5,000 pounds, 20 feet long. Some speculate older white sharks that have historically might have been caught could have been larger. We have this incredible population or aggregation off our coast, and that's why we celebrate sharks during Sharktober Fest. These sharks have been tagged, and this is a satellite tag on its back here. This is a radio tag here. One sends off a little radio transmitter that needs to be received by a receiver. This one sends out a signal when the shark gets near the surface that goes to a satellite. And this gave us the information of where did the sharks go? Because researchers out at the Farallon Islands, 28 miles up to the west, is part of our Fish and Wildlife System, Peter Pyle and Scott Anderson, in the early 2000s, were started to see these incidents of predation, and they started documenting them. And Peter's a bird biologist, he's a great scientist, but he's also curious, and they started to document these events and increasing over the decades, and also identifying individuals by their fins, their fin print, because each one is like a fingerprint through photography. But they didn't know where they went, because every fall they'd show up, and then every winter they're gone until around August, September. Well, we know now through satellite tagging, thanks to Dr. Barbara Blocks, Dr. Sal Jorgensen, and others at the Tagging of Pelagic Predators at Stanford University and Monterey Bay Aquarium, that these sharks migrate all the way west, some as far as the Hawaiian Islands. Culturally, the Hawaiians actually had an oral record that these white sharks showed up, but scientists were shocked to find that these sharks would come all the way out here. This is mid-migratory cycle. Red are permanent fixes or confirmed fixes. Yellow are speculated based on sea surface temperature and other data, but the red ones are where they come to the surface. These are a few sharks here showing these kind of separate subgroupings, some in the near our coastline and to the south in the Southern California Bight, some midstream, mid-migration, some around here in this mid-Pacific area we call the White Shark Cafe, and then others at the Hawaiian Islands. And then some kind of would migrate north all the way up here and kind of meander their way down. And this was still an unknown. This is data that was published in 2009. We know a lot more now, but we've discovered that these sharks actually migrate and then they come back every year, just like the gray whales in this incredible migration. So this shows some of that data that Jorgensen et al. Published in, I think it was Nature. And the chart I showed earlier would probably be right around February. So if you look at top left is January, bottom right is December, maybe the opposite on your screen. You see right around here in June, July, August, the sharks start coming back. By September, there's this high density off of our coastline. And by October, they're almost all off the coast of both North America, off of San Francisco, Año Nuevo, to the south, Drake's Bay, but also down off Southern California, as well as, this does not show the Mexican shark population, which also migrates to the white shark cafe. They are almost identical genetically, so they're probably reproducing out there. And those give birth in this Vizcaino Bay off of Mid-Baja, or also in the Sea of Cortez. And they too will migrate all the way west and back each year. So we thought, well, surfers knew that they showed up. We didn't know where they went. The scientists didn't know where they went, but now we know where they went. And now we know where they return in this incredible migration to our National Marine Sanctuary, where they're protected both in state waters, but also federal waters. So this is our Greater Farallones National Marine Sanctuary in green, expanded around 5 years ago, 6 years ago now, thanks to first Lynn Woolsey, Congressman Lynn Woolsey, who campaigned long and hard and then finished off by Congressman Jared Huffman in the district from Marin to Eureka. And so that sanctuary kind of expanded from about 1,600 to 3,250 miles, kind of like an amoeba. It's given the Cordell Bank, another National Marine Sanctuary, an underwater sanctuary, which is an underwater pinnacle, one of these granite plugs, which is contiguous as part of this chain of the Farallones on the Pacific Plate. And these areas, including the Monterey National Marine Sanctuary, the very first to be established in 1972, are areas that protect our wildlife, our cultural resources, our natural resources from pollution, from bottom fishing, from bottom dragging primarily, and oil exploration. There is commercial fishing allowed in our sanctuaries. They are not true refuges, but they do provide a large amount of protection. And we're extremely fortunate off the San Francisco area to have all of this marine protection right outside the Golden Gate. And we get these global warriors and wanderers like our white sharks that we saw some go all the way to Hawaii and back, but also the Laysan albatross that sometimes makes 2-week migrations, 2,500 miles west and back, to feed in our National Marine Sanctuary waters during these rich upwelling cycles, such as we experienced especially this year. And then they return to trade off with their partners and nest in the Northwest Hawaiian Islands. So every year we go out to the Farallon Islands in public trips, but also education and science trips to what the ancient mariners called the Devil's Teeth, because they were so jagged and rough, and there were so many shipwrecks at the Farallon Islands. And also they're fog-bound and quite treacherous, especially in the winter and summer months by inclement weather. But they're also highly abundant with 26 species of marine mammals, from the blue whale, the largest animal ever to live on the planet, fin whales, minke whales, strange migratory whales that occasionally show up, and we see also the most common, the humpback whales, which we see highly acrobatic. They're been identified through research for decades. We're seeing individuals. We know their migratory pattern. They go all the way down off Costa Rica and Ecuador in the winters, and they come up to our upwelling zones where they are now until the forage fish, or the anchovy, or sardines, or sometimes squid, are feeding on the plankton in this rich upwelling cycle. And when those fade out, they head, and the water gets cold, they head south. But right now, this is one of the best years I've seen since 2015, since the marine heat wave, what we call the blob, which shut down our upwelling cycle, which caused a lot of starvation off of our coastline of marine mammals and pinnipeds and whales. And also a lot of the whales just didn't show up. And there was quite a bit of strandings and washed up animals. taken care of by our friends at the Marine Mammal Center. But this is one of the best years and high abundance. The water's cold, and we're just seeing spectacular amounts of whales. These rich waters also provide nesting habitat and feeding habitat for many species of marine seabirds, but also, of course, harbor seals, elephant seals, fur seals, and sea lions. And occasionally we see a sea otter move its way north, and hopefully will recolonize after being extirpated from this coastline by the Russian furriers. But the common murre, like the gray whales, are a great comeback story. Perhaps a few thousand individuals that were over harvested for their eggs to feed the 49ers, because there was no Petaluma, there were no chickens. So they went out and got seabirds, but these birds particularly suffered. These are a swimming bird that nests with one egg a season on these rocks, these treacherous rookeries. And these people would go out and harvest to feed the 49ers, but ended up almost destroying this population, along with DDT in the 60s and 70s, which made their eggs thin. Fortunately, these colonies have come back. There are as many as 100,000. It's cacophonous. They're all squawking and shrieking, and it's just incredible to see these rocks that look like they're shimmering with salt and pepper, which are not only the murres, but the gulls and the cormorants that use these islands to nest, as well as the many species of pinniped. The California sea lion has done best after the Marine Mammal Recovery Act. The Stellar sea lion, which is more golden and much larger, are also recovering. There are about 1,500 northern fur seals, the northern elephant seal, the favorite prey of the white shark, have recovered since they were killed also for their oil and their skins. And now we're seeing this great natural recovery off of our coastline. So it truly is a beautiful sight to see, really a wonderful place to observe, but also to observe these rare ocean predators that migrate so far and spend so little time at the surface, except for when they're in their predation mode. So here's one of our white sharks feeding on one of their favorite preys, an elephant seal, off of the Farallon Islands. And this is because of this high nutrient-rich, caloric-rich fat that these pinnipeds store for their own incredible migrations and to reproduce and give live birth on the islands as well. What has recently been found out since this blob is about what's happening with the young white sharks. We knew that we would see white sharks in the Southern California Bight, young white sharks, babies. And that's where the females go to gestate and give birth. So they do give live birth. And you see 4 to 6 foot sharks swimming along near the coastline. They eat rays and fish. They don't eat seals yet. But during, in the early 2000s, during that warming sea surface temperature, we saw an aggregation off Capitola near the Smithship, also off Bodega Bay. And a lot of these larger sharks, which typically would move south, stayed. So we're seeing this sort of expansion of this cohort that we had not experienced since the recovery of this population, since it's been protected since 1983. This is a very small population of marine animals. White sharks number somewhere between 500 and 1,500 total in this distinct population in the Northeast Pacific. It's very easy to overfish a population like that, like we did. Onset of reproduction for white sharks is somewhere around 12 to 15 years. So they're much more like mammals. They give live birth. Their gestation period is about a year, and they give birth to about 2 to 6 babies. So in their lifetime, a white shark can't have a lot of babies like a tuna fish or a mackerel can. So they're highly vulnerable to overfishing, but they are recovering. And it's very interesting to see this range shift in the younger sharks off our population. I mean, off of our, our populous centers. Why do we celebrate sharks? Because sharks are critical for the health of the ocean. They are the surgeons and the sanitarians. They heal the sick and they take out the trash. They keep the DNA more robust and healthy in those mesopredator populations and the populations below them. They also eat the sick, the stupid, and the slow, which tend to nurture the smart, the quick, and the fast, and the intelligent for the prey population, which actually regulates the DNA or modifies the DNA of the prey population. They also act as a regulator on those populations, so that if you remove the apex predator, you have what's called a trophic cascade that can affect the benthic, or the fundamental part of the ecosystem. So this is what we learned when we were looking at reef sharks on an expedition where I produced Shark Stewards of the Reef, and we saw sharks being finned and fished out, that the coral reefs were not as healthy. The coral reefs did not have as much abundance of fish and other species, and it did not have the genetic diversity that a population or an ecosystem has with apex predators. It doesn't just work bottom down, it works bottom up as well. All of those flat sharks provide a critical service to the health of the benthic ecosystem, or the bottom, like the mudsuckers, like the rays that bioturbate, that oxygenate, that eat the dead and the decaying, but also tend to keep the algae or some of the other species that might settle along the bottom and tend to keep the benthic ecosystem healthier, as well as the meso layers, the middle predators like the smaller sharks. So it's important to have an intact, integrated ecosystem for ecosystem health, which includes us. Unfortunately, we've ignored that. Over 100 million sharks and rays are killed each year for their fins or as bycatch, primarily for the wildlife trade. There's a paper in Nature that was published last year that estimates 77% of shark populations since 1950, since we started commercially fishing, are absent. We've taken that many out of the ocean, meaning hundreds of thousands of tons. At least 1/3, possibly as many as 1/2, are critically endangered, or vulnerable to extinction. Only a handful are protected through international or local protections. They've lost a great deal of their habitat, such as coral reefs, but also eelgrass beds. And at least 1/4 of the pelagic sharks are threatened with extinction. So early on, Shark Stewards started working to advocate to ban the shark fin trade and to educate and work with our Chinese American citizens and also our Chinese brothers and sisters overseas. We introduced the California shark fin ban that was introduced by then Assemblyman Huffman, now Congressman Huffman. We've worked with other groups now, Humane Society in 14 states, and now there's a bill that has passed the Senate in the Schumer bill, the Endless Frontier Act, but also is now in the House, HR 2811. This is the 4th introduction, and we have hope that we will be the 3rd largest country, behind Canada first, as we saw here with our advocates in Vancouver, but also in the UK, to ban the sale and trade of shark fin. Shark fin is a delicacy that dates back to the Sung Dynasty 1,000 years ago. It was the dish of the emperor that is now the dish of the middle class or the affluent. So where there used to be one emperor and a handful of nobility, there's now about 100 million or more people of means who want that association of status, of wealth, of generosity, which this dish, shark fin soup, represents. But it represents all of the opposite for sharks. It represents ecosystem decline and potential extinction, all for a delicacy that really isn't needed. Sharks are more important in the ocean than they are in a bowl of soup. So that's why we work with Chinese students in media, in Chinese media, in Asia. I spend 1/3 of my time pre-COVID in Southeast Asia, which is the gateway to China for the shark fin, but also working in China and Shenzhen. We're hoping to do an ocean film festival, maybe next year, maybe the year after. We are all one planet. We're all interconnected. We rely on the oceans for at least half our oxygen. 71% of our Earth is oxygen. It should be called is water, is ocean. It should be called planet ocean, not planet Earth. It represents almost all of the habitable space for marine life. Most of the phyla and taxa and species live in the ocean, not in the rainforest. And yet we do very little to protect it. Less than 7% or less than 8% of our oceans are protected, and even half of that truly protected in no-take reserves. So the goal is set by the United Nations and amplified by our President Biden and Governor Newsom to protect 30% of our open space by 2030. We have a long way to go, but that's a big part of what Shark Stewards is doing, supporting the establishment of the 4th California National Marine Sanctuary off of Big Sur, the Chumash National Marine Sanctuary, increasing marine protection, including in the San Francisco Bay, through this network of marine protected areas established under the Marine Life Protection Act, including 124 areas off of our coastline, 16% of state waters, but also supporting and creating marine protected areas in the Coral Triangle, which has the highest biological diversity on the planet. So this shows an MPA part of off of our coastline. Again, now we have 124 of these since 2019. Red is no take, you can't fish at all. Blue is mixed take or marine conservation area. 16% of our coastline is incorporated in this ecosystem connected network. I'm part of what's called the Golden Gate MPA. I'm a co-chair. You can learn more about it by going to our website, get a brochure, or volunteer. We're collecting data as volunteers underwater or with an ROV in our surveys out at the Farallones and our public trips during Sharktober, but also working with Fish and Wildlife to educate fishermen not to fish because we're seeing the benefit. Marine protected areas work, and they are also provide more resilience against perturbations like climate change. Protecting the ocean is going to protect humans, and protecting sharks is going to protect habitat because they're one of the most important regulators of habitat. What we're seeing in California is fishermen that, even though they're not killing protected sharks like white sharks, they're catching them for sport and maiming them. But they are catching seven-gill sharks, particularly gravid females like these off of San Francisco for world trophies. This is impacting our shark populations. We're gleaning data with students from UC Berkeley, and we're hoping to educate fishermen that catch and release is catch and kill or catch and harm, but also to regulate chumming and fishing of sharks at public piers and beaches where we're surfing, where kids are swimming, and where we don't want to have interactions with apex predators that harm the predators and may harm humans. That's called Shark Watch. We also bring students out into our sanctuary, taking measurements, observing wildlife, educating them to become future policymakers or scientists, but also communicators. I took this a couple of weeks ago off of our sanctuary. Right now, we have hundreds of humpback whales feeding these great events. We're providing data to the Golden Gate Cetacean Research Society, which I know you're familiar with, as well as the Happy Whale app that can identify these species year after year through their own little footprint, through their fluke that has an identifiable pattern. And of course, we see so many of these pinnipeds swimming off our shoreline and off of our Farallones, but these incredible birds like puffins, like rhinoceros auklet, like ashy storm petrels, like albatross, like it's like one of the most incredible panoplies, this cornucopia of wildlife right outside our gate. So you can join us, dive in, volunteer, donate if you can, support groups like the American Cetacean Society and the Marine Mammal Center. Learn how to become an advocate. We have a petition on our website. We're trying to reach 150,000 that we'll take to Washington, D.C. to tell our Congress people that they support HR 2811. They support banning gill nets off of Southern California, which we've been fighting for 15 years, advocated and supported by Senator Feinstein, reintroduced into the Congress, that we hope will be signed into law this year. A fishery that targets swordfish but kills thousands of sharks, it kills whales, it kills sea turtles, and it needs to be banned now. You can learn more at our website at sharkstewards.org. Please support our sanctuary and our state marine protected areas. Join us celebrating sharks this year, next year, every day, every year. You can learn more in our new book, Sharks for Kids. We're going to be doing more of these Sharktoberfest celebrations, and including trips out to the islands where you can join us each Sunday after the 3rd out to the Greater Farallones National Marine Sanctuary. We see wildlife, sometimes we see sharks, but we always see whales and incredible birds and other marine life. So thank you to my donors and sponsors, and thank you, American Cetacean Society, for listening. So I think we'll now open it up for questions or chat questions.
Yes. We are going to open it up for questions now. Thank you so much, David. That was an amazing, inspiring, and informative presentation. It's really extraordinary, the number of shark species that are right here in the Bay Area. We do have some questions coming in for you, so let me get to those. First of all, early on in your presentation, we had a question about leopard sharks. Someone is asking, what inverts do leopard sharks typically predate on?
Oh, forage on, or
Yeah, forage on, yeah.
what do the, I'm sorry, which?
Leopard sharks, what do they typically
feed on?
forage
They
on?
feed on crustaceans, crabs. They'll feed on fish if they can catch them, small fish, or they'll eat dead or dying fish that are at the bottom. So they're active foragers, primarily in the benthic, but they'll chase a fish down as well.
Okay. Another question about great whites. Do they actually come into the bay? Did you say that they actually do come into the bay?
Great white sharks do come into the bay. We know from the tagging data that they will come through the Golden Gate, swim along the waterfront right past Aquatic Park where I swim, or the Alcatraz Channel where we escape from Alcatraz. Typically they'll go as far as the Bay Bridge, typically not farther, circle back around and leave again. So we've had one male in particular that's come in 2 consecutive years that comes in, probably a pioneer. Typically younger males will kind of forage outside the areas where, like, especially the big sharks out at the Farallones, where the big sharks will actually chase the smaller sharks out. And there has been one observed predation event on a sea lion off of Alcatraz, right where we jump in the water to go swim our Alcatraz swim. I think it was 4 years ago, and it was a million YouTube hit. A young boy was doing the Jaws theme, but he was also saying, "This is so cool." So we know they're coming into the bay. We also are seeing more elephant seals come into the bay, as well as this little, it almost looks like an emerging colony out by Point Bonita. So we might see more of these in the future. So we're going to have a little bit more careful vigilance, but there's never been a bite of a white shark on a human inside the Golden Gate.
Okay, well, hopefully it will stay that way, although it's very exciting that they are coming into the bay. A question about the Shark Cafe area. Does it overlap with the Great Pacific Garbage Patch? And if
Absolutely.
so,
Yeah, it does.
So how does it affect their feeding success?
Well, what it looks like, and there was an expedition with Woods Hole and Stanford a couple of years ago, and they're using a lot of underwater drones and remote sensing. For the first time ever, we're learning that these sharks are diving as deep as 1,500 or more feet. They're probably foraging on giant squid. So how would the plastic in the gyre affect sharks? Well, it would affect like every higher vertebrate. As those plastics break down, they sink. They also get incorporated into the food chain or food web. They're not like tiger sharks. Like tiger shark, we see they'll eat anything, and they are definitely eating a lot of macroplastic. The white sharks, especially, are long lived. They can live as much as 70 years. So they bioaccumulate or biomagnify these toxins, particularly organic toxins, much like we do. And these are carcinogens, they're neurodisruptors, endocrine disruptors. So we're poisoning every element of the food chain, but in a short term, not as much as animals like tiger sharks, which will kind of bite at it, or oceanic white tips will kind of grab anything. So it definitely, the White Shark Cafe absolutely overlaps with the Pacific Gyre, the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. But along the way, there's lots of flotsam and jetsam, and there's plenty on the bottom here, unfortunately. Plastic is really one of the huge new emerging problems, but also I feel one of the solutions that we really need to address, but we can address. We don't have to go offshore to try to protect these animals. We can protect them by just using less plastic and advocating for less single-use manufacturing.
Right, absolutely. And I also, there's publications out there showing that cleaning up plastic from beaches is actually a relatively highly effective way to remove plastic from the ocean, as opposed to doing deeper water plastic extraction. So another question for you, is it possible, is there evidence of multiple species of shark breeding together and creating hybrids?
Not with white sharks. They're a distinct population. There's no genetic overlap. So we know that white sharks, at least this population in the Northeast Pacific, diverged at least 200,000 years ago through the genetic clock, essentially. But we are seeing hybridization in thresher sharks. And looking at Australia, it looks like some of the marginal sharks, or the sharks that live along the coast, are actually, in their case, their south is our north in the southern hemisphere towards colder waters. You're seeing warmer water sharks migrate south that typically wouldn't live in these areas, that are reef sharks that look like they're hybridizing. And that's a result of warmer sea surface temperature and climate change. So it's very interesting. And you definitely see hybridization in aquaria.
Interesting. Let's see, I had another question for you. Oh, for volunteering, are there opportunities for people to get involved as volunteers in Shark Stewards or related initiatives and organizations to help conserve sharks? And if so, how can they get involved?
Well, we're a largely volunteer organization. We have about 800 volunteers globally. We're based kind of on the Sierra Club model, where the need is we form volunteer chapters. So a lot of that is to drive legislation. So in different states in the US, but also in Malaysia, Indonesia, and Singapore. But, right now, especially during COVID, is, working virtually is really different. We don't really need volunteers in the field as much, aside from beach cleanups, because we still do beach cleanups. We're going to do Bay Day at Aquatic Park on October 16th. So if you want to come down and do not only picking up the trash, but actually quantifying it and providing that data to the national park to try to start a national park plastic-free movement, as well as a no smoking national park at our Aquatic Park Maritime area, which is right there in the San Francisco Bay. And we pick up 1,000 cigarette butts every cleanup. And those are plastic, cellulose acetate, they're toxic, and they cause a lot of harm to fish and seabirds. So, that's one of the few direct actions outdoors as we are slowly trying to crawl out of our COVID shell. But we always have volunteer needs for web development, for marketing, for grant writing, fundraising. There's a lot of online help that we get from people all over the world. So whatever your talent is, please apply it. You can go to sharkstewards.org. We have a volunteer category, like a tab, and we definitely love volunteers and energy and what you can bring.
Awesome. Excellent. I know there's some people watching right now who are interested, so thank you for that. We have a question asking, is it possible to have your email or some way for people to get in contact with you?
Sure.
Maybe
I'll put it in the chat. It's
Okay.
just David@sharkstewards.org.
Great.
Or there's a contact form, and you can sign up for our monthly newsletter on our website as well. There's a contact form there as well. But yeah, that's my email.
Excellent. Are there any other questions for David?
Well, I'm looking at Leslie's here. First of all, I hope that people didn't think that I was saying that sharks are mammals, because of course they're not. They're fish. They don't breathe air. And they are elasmobranchs, which includes the group of sharks, skates, rays, and chimera, which are called the ghost fish. But we do kind of comically call the flat sharks, because we want people to know that they're elasmobranchs, they're cartilaginous, They are closely related to sharks, but they're also among the most imperiled as well as the most speciose. So they're at least twice as many species of the flat sharks or the rays and scates as there are the what we consider the true sharks. But Leslie also said that I think I shouldn't say it, she's had shark fin soup. So a lot of Americans have had shark fin soup. Leslie's last name doesn't look Chinese or Asian, but it is a dish that could be commonly consumed before we made it illegal here in Chinatown. It was actually one of the most abundant centers, not only of consumption, but also of trade. And so that was really the issue between New York, San Francisco, and Los Angeles, which are large hubs of affluent Asian Americans. There were also dry seafood traders that not only trade in shark fin, seahorses, sea cucumber, you name it. So those were the areas that we felt we really needed to target, not only in regulation, but education. So we formed a group called the Asian American Harmony Association, largely represented, including in the legislature when we were lobbying, of people of the culture that were advocating that this is not an acceptable cultural practice. And that's something that's very important wherever you work in any culturally sensitive practices. You need to work with the people of that culture and understand the sensitivities around it. And so fortunately, that bill was also carried by Senator or Assemblyman Paul Fong, who was himself a naturalized Chinese American.
Wonderful. Okay. Any other questions from anyone in the audience? Now's your chance.
I'll be giving a slightly different talk in a couple of weeks at the Marin Scuba Club, if any of you are scuba divers or belong. And that's going to be a hybrid event where I'm actually going to be in person. Kind of nervous, but I'm vaccinated and we're going to be careful. And please go to our website. And if you want to join us on a trip every Sunday, and we talk about the natural history, we talk about whales, and we also talk about policy and the formation of the sanctuary and seabirds and human behavior and interactions. And it's always, every trip is different. It's always an incredible experience. And few people have ever been out to the Devil's Teeth. It's a really wild place. That's one of our fish and wildlife refuges and the largest seabird colony in North America.
It is an extraordinary place, and it's also a wonderful way to see often cetaceans and many of the other animals that you highlighted in your presentation. It's a phenomenal and very, very special and critical habitat for so many species. So it's a great opportunity.
So if I could just leave you with one thing, I've been doing this for I wanted to become a marine biologist when I was 13. That's when I started studying. And it's actually when I first saw my first shark surfing. But I never got into this to save sharks. I got into it because I love the ocean. And I still work to save how wonderful our ocean is. And we saw what gray whales go from 3,000 to over 30,000. They were placed on the endangered species list in the 70s, or maybe in the 80s. And they've recovered and they've been removed from the endangered species list because it shows that what people can do if they care and they love animals. And whale populations globally are recovering, but we still need to keep working. Gray whale populations are on the decline. They're still a healthy population. Sea otters are on the margin. They are on the razor's edge. White sharks could be killed. One oil spill could extirpate common murres or brown pelicans out of our sanctuaries and refuges. So we can't sit on our laurels. We have to realize how urgent this is, especially with these new insidious threats of plastic pollution and climate change. So whatever you can do, however we can do it, the time to do it is really now, because we have so much that could be lost in just a couple of decades. And I don't want to see the end of my lifetime things go the opposite direction. So help out, do whatever you can, and do what you're doing with the ACS. So thank you again.
Absolutely a wonderful message and right on point, David. Thank you so much for you inspiring us, giving us ideas about how we can help to conserve sharks, help to conserve our ocean, and identifying opportunities for us to get involved.
We love kids
Thank you very
too.
much.
Bring the kids.
Bring the kids.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.